I've got everything I need, so it's time to kick off the drift trike project. So we're going to build the drift trike out of everything you see here. Starting with the engine, it's a 5-horse Briggs off an old tiller I had. Rest in peace, Roper 5-horse tiller. Got the centrifugal clutch for it, the axle, 2 Unelli 11.5 by 8 and 6-inch aluminum wheels. So getting the first side on is the easy part. Then you have to flip it over and push the other side on. And to do that, I couldn't get it. I fought it for a long time, and I couldn't even get it close. Spoons. So I threw it in the oven and let the oven come up to temp with the wheel. And then eventually it got about too hot to touch. And when it was that hot, I pulled it out and came in here, and it still took a lot of effort. Oh, but we finally got it mounted. Oh yeah. And then you gotta lube everything up and hit it with about 55 PSI pressure and let the bead seat. And fortunately on this one, the first bead sat pretty easy. But the second bead didn't want to set, so I had to let all the air out and put a lot more lube on. Hey! Then the bead finally popped on and set the air pressure about where I want it. And those are good. Then we have wheels and tires. And bearing carriers with weld-on hangers. Got the hubs that go with the wheels. We'll put those together. You have to kind of pre-assemble the hub. We're putting the screws through it. Give them a little bit of torque. Generic chain. Tractor seat from Amazon. Split sprocket with hub. We'll put that together real quick. Right, we'll put the sprocket and the hub together. So it's a 54 tooth. There's a 5 and a 4 etched in. I'm going to put it so that you can read it. 54. So the screws go through the sprocket. And then the thread into the hub. Easy. It's ready to go. New brake cables and throttle cable if the ones on this bike don't work. And this BMX bike that I picked up on Facebook locally, and I'm gonna feel bad cutting up because it's a lot of fun to ride, and honestly I'm super good at it. But we're gonna cut it up anyway. And then in my trash heap, some sections of tube that we'll bend up to make the rest of the frame. Weld it all together and we'll have a trike. Time to take the bike apart. Alright, now we're going to cut it up. The final cut is going to be real close, but I'm going to rough cut it over here, and then I'm going to cut somewhere over here. Maybe keep this, I don't know. It's a nice little routing for the cable. And then we're going to cut the back off. And sorry buddy. It's going to be cooler with an engine. There you go. All right, nice and smooth. All right, now I got the axle in front of the engine. I think that's the way that I want it to go. And now you can see, now we can see with the rod I bent, everything moved. You can see it'll come over and I can make a plate to mount the engine. And then on the other side, I had to move it out of the way, but also we'll clear, move the engine a little bit, make a plate there to mount, run some tubes between the seat to mount the seat on. And it's still pretty compact like that. And I think this is gonna work out okay. Vroom, vroom, vroom. Stop, stop, stop. Time to bend some tube. So this is a JD squared Model 3 tube bender. It's pretty clever. This one's pretty old. This one's probably been around for at least 10 years. It's actually my friend Tom's, but I've been borrowing it for I've been borrowing it for a couple years. So I guess it's mine, I don't know. There's a piece here that has 2 notches for the tube. The tube goes through there, and this doesn't move. It can pivot, but it doesn't move. And then when you pull the handle, it pushes this lever kind of towards me, and it spins the die that is curved. You lock the tube in with this little clamp guy, and it works really well. It's on a stand. Usually you bolt these to the ground, but I like to be able to move it around. I might weld the stand to a tire, or a rim and tire. So to keep it from moving around while you're bending, I welded this piece on. And then you can stick another piece of tube in there and hold this to stabilize. You push it on that and it bends the tube. So what I'm doing now, I'm making a reference bend. Usually I make these more than 90 degrees. I'm almost there, but I'm going to show a little bit of bending. So you need to know where your bend starts. So you need a reference to tell you that. So this is where the bend starts. I got a mark, and I etched a little mark in the die. And then sometimes that's hard to see if it's underneath this arm. So I made another mark 1.25 inches away. So I can mark 1.25 inches from the start of the bend. So when you're making a bend in a piece of tube, you need to know where the bend goes in the piece of tube. So you need to know where it starts. So now you can line this mark up that you can always see. But this reference piece, you can put it kind of spatially where you want the bend to go, and then measure from there to where your other bend or where the tube stops or whatever, and then make a mark here, line it up, bend it. You know your bend will be in about the right place. And usually you leave it a little long on either end and then you trim it. But if you have a bunch of bends in a row, and it's really critical to get the position of those right, you need to know exactly where the bend starts and stops. So you make this mark, and then obviously where it stops is over there. So I've got this guy in here. I can point this into tube wherever I want, and all I have to do is push this lever. And then you can bring it back and reset it on a new ratchet. And then one more. It's been super easy. It's really simple. I like this bender a lot. Alright, I measured my reference piece. We're bending this to 23 degrees. I got my marks lined up. Ooh, kind of close. That's quick. Yeah, I bent it a hair too far. I got this first tube roughly the length, so I'm going to mark it and notch it. I'm just going to scribe a rough mark using the frame and then grind it close and then kind of fuzz it in until it all fits. Then I'll just mark it and grind it and mark it and grind it, mark it and grind it until it fits pretty good. I think I got the first 2 pieces about how I want them. This piece has a steeper bend and is one of the outrigger parts that the axle will mount to. I'll weld it to the first piece just behind the bend in that piece, and it shows about 45 degrees, so I'll just round to 45 and I'll bend 2 matching tubes to 45. So something I forgot last time, this bender has a little degree indicator, and once you have your piece of tube where you want it in the die, you get everything kind of tightened up, you just use this piece of welding rod, the filler rod, and you adjust it and you move the degree indicator to 0, and then as you bend you keep an eye on that, and you want to bend a hair past where you're going because it kind of relaxes and springs back just a degree or so. And then if you're building 2 to match, you just bend it to the exact same point for both tubes. Whew, that thick tube was a lot more work than the thin stuff, but I got 2 tubes that are bent the same, so I'm going to notch them to fit. It's the same process as before. So I'll just mark it and cut it, and mark it and grind it over and over like the other ones until it fits. Then I got another piece of tube here that I'll use to check, so I don't have to go up and down a bunch of times. Alright, got everything notched in nice. I always mark everything with 2 or 3 lines. So one line is kind of easy to get confused what goes where, but if you have 2 or 3, they only match up one specific exact way. Since I'm not going to weld it right this minute, I want a bunch of lines so that I can have it clearly marked whenever I do get around to welding it later. Before I get to welding, I got to clean all the oil and rust and scale and marks off of these. It's a quick, easy step with some brake parts cleaner or Scotch-Brite or sandpaper or whatever you got, and it makes the welds a ton easier. It's so much easier. And then you get decent looking welds that way. Alright, I got the tubes clamped a few times on my welding table. Got the mark saw line back up. I'll tack it in a few spots, and then I'll kind of check that everything is still square and where I want it. And then if I have to, I'll grind the tacks off, but I'll get it where I want it intact, and then I'll weld it in fully, and it'll probably move a little bit. But I got it clamped pretty good, and this is all thin enough that I can just kind of bend it back. Then I'll let everything cool off before I set it all up to tack it to the frame so that it can settle and I can get it square. So if you do it while it's hot, it could be still kind of moving around, still kind of flexing that last little bit. Alright, I'm going to weld 1/2 of the pre-welded piece to the bike and get it square, and then square and level. The second half I'll weld up and get it square to the first half. It looks like it's going to require a little finesse and some creative clamping. It's kind of a goofy shape. Which reminds me, you can grind these little tabs off like this. And then this guy comes off, and you can put them on backwards. So then you can put them on backwards, and you swap this guy with the little screw and the nut there, and you have a inverted clamp. Look at that. My table isn't in the right place to clamp all this to it right now, so I'll get it square and keep it square while I weld it, and then it'll still be a little flexible and I'll get it just right. Alright, so I used my inverted clamp and some blocks with some washers to get everything spaced. It's all nice and parallel, centered. And then I used my square to mark all the ends. Then I marked about the pattern of the fish mouth I want to cut, and now I'm going to try to notch them all and hope that a piece of tube fits in there without a bunch of crazy gaps. Alright, I got all 4 tubes notched. It actually was pretty uneventful, went really well, and I got my clamp and my spacers all back in there, and everything's pretty square. And then I'm actually going to tack this piece, and I went ahead and knocked all the pitting and rust off of this one just because it'll be a little harder to clean than the rest of them. It was really, really bad. It's a lot easier to tack something like this, kind of awkward, and in a whole bunch of spots I got to hold a bunch of stuff with the MIG welder, so I'll make it to tack it and then I'll take it to finish it. And that'll wrap up part 1 of the trike build. So the base portion of the frame is done. We just built that. The engine is a standalone since it came from that tiller, so that's pretty straightforward. Its gas tank and air filter and muffler are all one piece. And then I showed the axle components. So now that we kind of have everything, the next episode will be putting it all together into something that works. So thanks for watching, and I look forward to putting up part 2.